Alright guys, Dominic here for Kit Guru, and it is safe to say I was not expecting to review another 7700 XT at this point in time. But when Sapphire got in touch and told me one of their limited edition Frostpunk 2 graphics cards was on the way, well, you just know I had to take a look. We first saw this card back at Computex 2024, and you will immediately notice it sports a very unique aesthetic that ties in directly with the game Frostpunk 2. Today then, we're going to take a look at this graphics card and find out whether or not it's worth buying as we head into the latter stages of 2024. The first thing you need to know then about the Sapphire RX 7700 XT Pure Frostpunk 2 edition is that it is fundamentally the same underlying card as the regular 7700 XT Pure that we have reviewed over on the kitguru.net website. By that I mean the same underlying PCB design and heatsink is exactly the same, but what's different is that Sapphire has applied a unique aesthetic all about Frostpunk 2 to this card. Plus, you get quite a few cool little accessories in the box, and you also get a deluxe game code. Starting with the unboxing experience then, there's a variety of unique accessories that make this a limited edition Frostpunk 2 card, including 3 enamel pins. One is actually a mini version of the graphics card itself, one shows a pair of keys, and another shows what I assume is an in-game character. We also get a set of 3 cherry profile keycaps spelling out FP2, along with a keycap puller. Then you get a small card that gives you the deluxe edition Frostpunk 2 game code, and Sapphire also includes a GPU support bracket as well. Moving on to the graphics card itself then, as I mentioned earlier, this is fundamentally the same core design as the regular 7700 XT Pure that we have already reviewed. That means we get a white plastic shroud with a few grey accents thrown in for good measure, and it's also a triple fan cooler using Sapphire's angular velocity fan blades, and each fan measures just under 100mm in diameter. The star of the show is, of course, the unique aesthetic, however, which isn't immediately apparent if you only look at the fan area, but the backplate has been entirely taken over with a massive Frostpunk 2 logo and a fire-inspired design. Even if you've never played the games, I honestly do think it looks pretty cool, and it is certainly something different to what we are used to seeing. The sides of the card have also been touched up. It kind of looks like the plastic itself has been burnt away by the flames, and that ties in nicely with the overall design. As for dimensions as well, the card comes in at 320 by 128.8 by 52.6mm. Now, the Frostpunk 2 card also makes one other key change versus the original Pure 7700 XT, and that is with the LED zone. So on the original 7700 XT Pure, it was a red only LED and you could only toggle it on or off. This time around, however, Sapphire's actually opted for an ARGB LED zone, and by default it ships with this kind of burnt orange glow that I guess ties in with the overall look of the card. However, you can also customize it using Sapphire's Trick software, and you can even plug in an ARGB cable and connect the graphics card to your motherboard if you would rather control the lighting that way. Just like the original Pure, power is still delivered by 2 8-pin connectors, and display outputs consist of 2 HDMI 2.1 and 2 DisplayPort 2.1. Of course, I did also take the card apart so we could take a closer look at the cooler and the PCB, and starting off with the heatsink design, we can see that Sapphire is using 2 aluminium fin stacks, and these are connected by 5 6mm heat pipes. The GPU and memory contact with 1 base plate, and there's 2 smaller base plates for the MOSFETs as well. I also think it's really cool that Sapphire actually mounts the heatsink to the graphics card itself rather than to the fan shroud, and this means you can remove the fan shroud without actually disassembling the heatsink from the PCB, so if a fan breaks for instance and you don't actually need to tear the whole card apart, this makes life that bit easier. In terms of the PCB then, Sapphire has opted for a 10-phase VRM for the GPU, controlled by a Monolithic Power Systems MP2856. Memory VRM is 2-phase, also using an MP2856 controller. Lastly, we can also see that monolithic MP87997 MOSFETs are used across both GPU and memory VRM, rated at 70 amps.
If you're looking for a new chair, then you should definitely check out Booley's. I'm currently sat on their Ninja Pro gaming chair, which is one of 3 models from their gaming series alongside the Elite and the master. So if you're looking for something new to stick in your setup that you can sit on and game and work, then I recommend definitely checking out boolies.co.uk.
That is it though for our look at the design of the card, and it's now time to move on to testing. For this, I'm using our regular GPU test system provided to us by PC Specialist, and this is based on Intel's i9-3900KS CPU, which we've paired with the Gigabyte Z790 Gaming X AX motherboard, alongside 32 gigs of Corsair Dominator Platinum DDR5 memory. All testing is also done using MSI's MPG321URX QD OLED 4K monitor. Kicking testing off with our thermal results then, as we'd expect considering the Frostpunk 2 edition uses the same cooler as the regular Sapphire Pure model, thermal performance is almost identical between the two cards. I did actually see the Frostpunk model run just 1 degree hotter across the GPU and hotspot metrics, but interestingly it did also operate with a slightly slower fan speed in my testing, but the differences are very, very minor. As just mentioned though, the Sapphire Frostpunk 2 card did run with very slightly slower fan speeds than the regular Pure model, hitting 19% or 1930 RPM fan speed compared to 25% or 1020 RPM for the regular Pure. It's honestly a very small difference, but it was just enough to lower noise levels slightly, making this one of the quietest cards we have ever tested. Once we normalised noise output to 40 decibels, thermal performance of the Frostpunk 2 was again basically identical to the Pure model. It did clock in 1 degree lower this time, but that's basically margin for error and is not of any significance. Compared to other 7700 XT models we've tested though, the Power Color Hellhound is still comfortably the best in this department, but the Gigabyte Gaming OC is also very similar to the Sapphire Frostpunk card. As for power draw then, as a reminder, here we are using Nvidia's PCAT tool, so we can measure power draw of the graphics card only rather than total system power draw. Interestingly, despite sharing the same 240 watt TBP rating as the regular Pure model, I actually saw the Frostpunk 2 edition draw consistently more power in my testing, hitting over 250 watts compared to the sub 240 watts readings for the Pure. Now, this could be down to ASIC quality or several other factors, but it's not a huge difference anyway, and certainly isn't anything to be worried about. Naturally, that slightly higher than expected power draw does have a small knock-on for efficiency. We recorded the Frostpunk 2 losing about 7% performance per watt compared to the Pure, but as mentioned above, it is a very minor difference and unlikely to affect your final buying decision. As for GPU clock speed then, here we record the frequency over a 30-minute stress test in Cyberpunk 2077 and plot that here in comparison to the other 7700 XT cards that we've already tested. Aside from the reference clocked Sapphire Pulse, which is comfortably a little bit slower, you can honestly throw a blanket over those other factory overclocked cards, as they all run within 20 MHz of each other, including the Frostpunk 2 edition, which averaged 2517 MHz over our 30-minute stress test. Naturally, that has a clear knock-on effect for gaming performance, and basically explains why we don't focus too closely on gaming benchmarks in our AIB card reviews. In this instance, we can see that the Sapphire Frostpunk edition is basically as fast as the other models we've tested, with the exception of the reference clocked Sapphire Pulse. We can, however, still see that the 7700 XT is comfortably faster than the RTX 4060 Ti 16GB, which is Nvidia's nearest rival, retailing for around £410. The 7700 XT is 30% faster in Cyberpunk, for instance, so it really is in a different league to the 4060 Ti 16GB. Of course, I did also try my hand at overclocking, and as with all RDNA 3 GPUs, you can basically max out the GPU clock slider, and how much extra frequency you're actually going to get really comes down to just how far you can undervolt the GPU. In this instance, I was able to drop voltage to 1060 millivolts and had the memory at 2400 MHz. This saw our real-world GPU clock speed hit 2864 MHz on average over our 30-minute stress test, so that's about a 250 MHz boost over stock frequency. The actual real-world gains weren't overly significant, however, as we saw around 6% increases to the frame rate in both Cyberpunk 2077 and Resident Evil 4. Coming to the end of this review then, I personally always find it fun when we get hands-on with limited edition or special edition hardware, and for me, it's been no different when checking out the Sapphire RX 7700 XT Pure Frostpunk 2 edition. Fundamentally, we already know what this card is all about, as it shares the same core PCB and cooler design as the regular Pure model. However, it is clearly all about the new Frostpunk 2 aesthetic that takes pride of place across the backplate while curving neatly over the edges of the shroud. I also appreciate the addition of the ARGB LED zone, replacing the red-only LED on the original Pure card. The cooler itself is just as effective as we expected, considering it's the same heatsink design as the Pure. That is to say, it runs very cool and very quiet, and while it isn't quite as competitive as the Power Color Hellhound in terms of noise normalized thermals, it is still a very capable cooler. As for my thoughts on the RX 7700 XT GPU itself, I do still have mixed feelings. On the one hand, the 7700 XT absolutely annihilates its closest rival from Nvidia, being the RTX 4060 Ti 16GB, as the 7700 XT comes in about 20 to 25% faster on average at 1440p, while actually costing less money. So from that perspective, it is a definite no-brainer. But while 7700 XT pricing has fallen, with this limited edition model currently listed at £399.95, the pricing of the 7800 XT has also dropped, and I've seen models as low as £430. Considering then that the 7800 XT is about 15% faster on average and packs in 4 gigs more VRAM, I do still think that makes the 7700 XT's very existence quite a bit complicated, as I think most buyers would be better off spending the 10% or so premium and getting the 7800 XT instead. However, there will be some buyers out there who can't go above £400, and for those people, I do think the 7700 XT is the best option. As we already said, it absolutely crushes its closest rival from Nvidia and really isn't far off the RTX 4070. Ultimately, this is a very unique but capable RX 7700 XT. I personally do think that most people who are prioritizing performance would be better off going for the 7800 XT. However, if you just want something a little bit different, you want something quite unique compared to the rest of the 7700 XT cards on the market, and you can't spend over £400, well, in that case, I do think the Sapphire Frostpunk 2 limited edition is well worth considering. Anyway guys, that brings us to the end of our review. So if you liked it, please do toss me a thumbs up, and as always, let me know your thoughts on this card down in the comments below. While you're there, you can also subscribe if you haven't already and ding that notification bell. And if you want to come and carry on the conversation, you can find a link to our Discord server in the description. While you're there, you'll also find links to our merch store where you can pick up cool t-shirts like these. And if you are feeling particularly generous, you can even consider backing us on Patreon. That is it for this one though guys. I'm Dominic for Kit Guru, and I'll see you in the next video.